I was holding a tray of champagne flutes when the CEO looked straight past my sister's marketing pitch straight at me. Isn't that Maya Rivera? He asked, pausing mid-sentence. My sister froze. Her voice cracked. That's just my younger sister. She's helping with catering. He smiled, raised an eyebrow, and turned to the room. Well, in that case, I suppose now's a good time to tell everyone that Maya's company has just acquired a majority stake in ours. The crystal in my tray didn't shatter, but the illusion my family had built around me that crumbled loud and clear. That moment didn't just shift the power dynamic in the room, it shattered years of being dismissed, overlooked, and gently pushed aside in favor of flashier, louder, shinier versions of what success should look like. You know the type, the perfect daughter with the MBA, the sleek career, the curated Instagram feed. My sister Isabelle, she fit the mold. I never did. I didn't throw parties. I built systems. I didn't network. I nurtured. And while they called me just the girl at the bakery, I quietly scaled a fintech company built on trust, resilience, and a deep understanding of what people like my family actually need. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have known you best, then stay with me. This isn't just a story about business, it's about value, about how some people won't see your worth until you stop trying to earn their approval and start building your own foundation. It's about quiet power and how sometimes the loudest victory comes without raising your voice at all. My name is Maya Rivera, and this is the story of how I went from the girl who was asked to stay out of family photos to the woman who bought the building they were photographed in. Let's begin. Growing up in San Antonio, Texas, in a family that prized image and upward mobility, I learned early that not all love is equal, and not all success looks the same. My sister Isabelle was the blueprint. She walked like confidence had been stitched into her spine. Every family friend gushed over her debate medals, her early internship at a law firm, her perfect GPA. I baked. I fixed broken toasters. I helped mom calculate payroll at our family's small panaderia when I was 10, not because I had to, but because I liked making order out of chaos. Our family's bakery, La Flor del Barrio, was a fixture in our neighborhood. My abuela started it with nothing but a rolling pin and a dream. But as years passed and as my parents tried to climb into more respectable circles, the bakery became an embarrassment. They smiled at its legacy but winced at its limitations. And when it came to me, the daughter who chose to stay late balancing the books instead of joining student government, there was no celebration. Only polite silence and backhanded compliments like she's good with numbers but she lacks drive. I heard it all, every word. Still, I kept going. While Isabelle was being flown out for university interviews, I was rebuilding our website after school, learning HTML and basic JavaScript from YouTube tutorials. No one noticed. And that's the thing about being underestimated. It becomes your camouflage. You stop being expected to shine. And in that quiet, invisible space, you learn how to build something no one's watching. That was my first real lesson. Just because people don't see your start doesn't mean your path isn't worth walking. What they didn't realize was that every spreadsheet I balanced, every sale I tracked, every line of code I wrote for the bakery's backend was shaping me into someone who would eventually build something far beyond this neighborhood. But back then, I was just Maya, the quiet one, the helper, the one who didn't quite fit the Rivera brand. And as Isabelle was crowned the golden child, I began laying the foundation stone by stone, late at night between shifts and silence. What no one knew then was that this so-called discounted sister was already charting a course towards something they couldn't imagine. But before the world saw that version of me, I had to navigate being invisible. And that journey, it's where the real transformation began. There's a certain rhythm to early mornings in a family bakery. The scrape of metal trays, the hiss of steam from proofing ovens, the quiet clatter of mixing bowls. It's a language you grow up understanding even if you're not fluent in words yet. For me, those mornings weren't chores. They were a kind of communion. While other kids in my neighborhood were still wrapped in blankets, I was kneading dough with my father or restocking the display case with my mother. Behind every pastelito sold, I saw numbers, patterns, and missed opportunities we couldn't afford to keep missing. That's when it began my obsession with efficiency, not the cold corporate kind, but the kind born out of necessity. I started noticing how long each task took, how inventory got miscounted, how we'd lose track of invoices when the handwritten receipts piled up too fast. I couldn't explain it then, but I knew we needed a better system. So I started building one. I taught myself spreadsheets first, then a little CSS, then Python. My first project, a clunky app that tracked ingredient costs and suggested bulk order bundles based on local vendor prices. It wasn't elegant, but it saved us almost $900 in the first 3 months. No one clapped. There was no press release or applause from the family dinner table, but it worked. It helped. And in that quiet success, I learned a powerful truth legacy isn't about continuing the same story, it's about adapting it. I wasn't going to inherit the bakery in the traditional sense, but I could evolve what it stood for, from flour to code, from hands-on work to systems that could scale. That little tool became the seed for something larger. I realized if our bakery needed it, so did thousands of other small, immigrant-owned businesses with tight margins and no time for tech. But what if they didn't have to choose between tradition and transformation? What if someone built tools that honored both? That was the question that shaped Novalend, the platform I'd one day found. But in those early days, it wasn't about startups or investors. It was about helping my family breathe a little easier, and maybe creating something that would one day prove I was more than the girl behind the counter. Little did I know the code I was writing in the back room of a bakery would soon rewrite my place in the world and in my family. The night David proposed wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect. We were sitting on a picnic blanket in Brackenridge Park, the city skyline glowing faintly in the distance. He handed me a small velvet box and said, "You've never asked for anything, but I want to give you everything I can." And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen not for what I did, but for who I was. I said yes, without hesitation, not just to the ring, but to the idea of being loved without conditions. Bringing him home to meet my family should have been a celebration. Instead, it was a subtle but unmistakable return to hierarchy. At dinner, Isabelle made her usual entrance, perfect makeup, curated laughter, and a compliment laced with critique. "Oh, Maya's fiancé is a public school teacher? That's noble." She said it with a smile as she twirled her wine. The table laughed too easily, as if her approval was currency. I watched David stiffen, unsure whether to laugh along or defend himself. He chose silence. That hurt more than her words. Then came the roast. Isabelle mused, it's kind of romantic, Maya baking bread and David shaping young minds. It's like a Hallmark movie, just with fewer zeros on the paycheck. Everyone laughed again. I didn't. I just excused myself to check on dessert, pretending not to notice my mother's relieved nod or my father's silence. It wasn't about money. It was about value. And in that moment, I understood the quiet message love in our family was respected only if it came wrapped in prestige. David may have seen me, but he didn't protect me. And my family, they couldn't resist ranking me, even in joy. The lesson I learned that night was simple but sobering. Not all rejection comes in the form of closed doors. Sometimes it's wrapped in white tablecloths and laughter, and sometimes the hardest part isn't being mocked, it's realizing the people who should defend you won't. Still, I stayed quiet. I wore the ring. I played the part. Because deep down, I was still hoping for a seat at a table that was never built with me in mind. But the invitation I'd been waiting for would soon come in a form no one expected, and at an event where I wasn't meant to shine at all. The invitation came on thick, embossed cardstock, so formal, it almost felt sarcastic. You are cordially invited to celebrate Isabelle Rivera's promotion to Vice President of Marketing at Astra and Lennox Capital. I stared at the gold lettering for a while, then turned it over. On the back in her looping script, she'd added, "Would love your help with catering logistics." You're so good at that kind of thing. That kind of thing. I said yes, of course. Not because I didn't recognize the dig, but because I had grown used to wearing grace like armor. Besides, there's a particular strength in showing up when people expect you to stay small. David was hesitant. "You don't have to let her treat you like staff," he whispered, but I smiled. "She doesn't know I own the kitchen," I replied. When I arrived at the venue, the Whitmore estate, it looked like a Pinterest board had collided with a hedge fund. Everything sparkled. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures shaped like the Astra and Lennox logo. Even the servers wore tuxedos with branded lapels. It was meant to be Isabelle's night, a crown jewel in her curated life, and I was placed quite literally behind the scenes. As I checked in with the caterers, I noticed her gaze grazing me from across the marble foyer. She smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "You know how I am with details. I need this night to be flawless." "No surprises." I nodded, the corners of my mouth lifting just enough. "Of course. I'll make sure it's unforgettable." What Isabelle didn't know was that earlier that same morning I'd received an email, short, direct, and impossible to ignore. "Ms. Rivera, I would love the chance to meet the founder behind the analytics platform we've been licensing. I'll be attending tonight's event. Warmly, James Weller, CEO, Astra and Lennox Capital. The irony, Isabelle had no idea that the firm she'd spent her career trying to impress had been using my company's software for over a year. And now, the man at the top wanted to meet the mind behind it. That evening, as I tied on an apron and walked into the kitchen, I didn't feel like the discounted sister. I felt like the quiet architect of a different kind of power, the kind that doesn't arrive with trumpets, but settles in like gravity. And while everyone else toasted Isabelle's achievement, I prepared to serve the truth cold, precise, and impossible to ignore. It came at 7:12 a.m. While I was folding linens for the gala, my phone buzzing softly beside a cup of cold coffee. The subject line read, "Private meeting request, Astra and Lennox." I almost ignored it, assuming it was another logistics change from Isabelle. But when I opened the email, my breath caught. Ms. Rivera, our executive team has been deeply impressed with the performance of the analytics integration your company has provided. I will be attending tonight's event and would welcome a brief introduction to the founder of Novalend. I understand you prefer discretion, but I believe it's time we meet. James Weller, CEO. I read it 3 times. Then once more, just to be sure. The man Isabelle had built her entire corporate identity around her boss's boss's boss was requesting to meet me, not because of who I was to her, but because of what I had built quietly and competently without fanfare. It wasn't validation I was seeking, it was clarity. In that moment, something clicked. The distance between perception and reality doesn't matter as much as the direction you're walking. They saw a girl in an apron. He saw a strategist changing how small businesses accessed capital. I had spent years minimizing my role so others wouldn't feel threatened. But progress doesn't ask permission to be recognized. The lesson landed gently but firmly. The work you do in silence will eventually make a sound loud enough to reach the right ears. You don't need to scream to be heard, you just need to be ready when the spotlight shifts. I didn't tell Isabelle, or David, or even my parents. Not out of secrecy, but sovereignty. For once, I didn't need anyone's input on how to move. I'd already been moving quietly, strategically, and in alignment with something bigger than approval. As I zipped up my simple black dress and slipped my phone into my pocket, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. Not from the absence of tension, but from knowing I didn't have to prove anything anymore. I just had to show up. And that night, as the lights dimmed and glasses clinked, I was ready to meet the moment I had quietly built for years face to face. The sound of laughter floated through the ballroom like perfume sweet, practiced and carefully timed. Isabelle was in her element, gliding from one cluster of colleagues to the next, her laugh half a second louder than everyone else's. She looked radiant, powerful even. If you didn't know better, you'd think she owned the evening, and in a way she did. Everything had been arranged to reflect her ascent, the lighting, the speeches, even the custom-branded cocktail napkins. Her world was flawless, until it wasn't. At 8:13 p.m., right on schedule, the champagne began circulating for the toast. I had just passed a tray to a group of guests when I noticed him, James Weller, calm, sharp-eyed, unmistakably present. He stepped onto the raised platform near the garden entrance. Isabelle, ever the spotlight seeker, nearly tripped over her heels rushing to greet him. "Mr. Weller, so honored to have you here," she gushed, placing a hand on his elbow. "I've prepared a deck I'd love to show you." But his gaze wasn't on her, it was on me. "Isn't that Maya Rivera?" he asked aloud. The air shifted. Isabelle stiffened. "Oh, that's just my sister. She's helping out with the catering team," she said quickly, her voice light but strained. I could feel every eye in the room turn. James smiled politely. "Interesting. Because according to our last board memo, Maya Rivera is the founder and CEO of Novalend, which as of this afternoon has acquired a controlling interest in Astra and Lennox. And then silence, real silence, the kind that hums in your ears and slows time. Isabelle's champagne flute slipped from her hand and shattered against the marble tile. No one moved. You could hear the fizz evaporate in real time. "She's a baker." Isabelle finally stammered the words, small and childlike. "She doesn't, this must be a mistake." James looked at me. "It's no mistake. Maya and her team have revolutionized our mid-market data stream. Your department's most recent campaign powered by her analytics." I stepped forward, not arrogantly, not even proudly, but with quiet certainty. I've always been more comfortable behind the scenes, but this platform, this acquisition, has been in motion for years. That moment didn't feel like revenge. It felt like gravity restoring balance. I wasn't there to humiliate anyone. I was simply done hiding. The lesson echoed in every stunned face around me. Sometimes the most powerful truths don't need to be shouted. They just need to be undeniable. As the string quartet hesitated, unsure whether to keep playing, I caught Isabelle's eyes. She wasn't angry yet. She was undone by the realization that the story she'd spent her life curating had just met a truth she never saw coming. And as the room tried to recover, I realized this wasn't the climax, it was the beginning of an entirely new chapter. When the music finally resumed, it was more of a whisper than a melody. Like the room itself wasn't sure if celebration was still appropriate. Isabelle had vanished into one of the side halls, and the crowd buzzed with a mixture of awe and discomfort. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. Moments like these don't need explanations, they speak for themselves. But it wasn't just Isabelle who unraveled. My mother Rosa approached with a practiced smile that barely concealed her trembling lips. "Maya," she said softly, "surely we can talk about this. Privately." Behind her, my father hovered, silent eyes cast down, and David, my fiancé, stood near the bar looking more like a guest than a partner. I turned to Rosa fully. "For 3 years, you made me sit at the far end of the table. You cropped me out of family photos. You called it humility, but it was erasure. Now that you know I have power, you want privacy. But where was that privacy when I was being humiliated at every holiday dinner?" She blinked. "We didn't know." "That's exactly the point," I said. "You assumed I had no value because I didn't perform success the way Isabelle did. And now, because my name is tied to money suddenly, I'm worth listening to." That moment taught me something raw and necessary. Conditional love isn't love at all. When your worth depends on your resume or your bank balance, what you're receiving isn't affection, it's approval rented by achievement and revoked in silence. My father stepped forward, finally meeting my gaze. "She's right," he said, voice low but firm. "We let our pride speak louder than our values, and I let it happen." It was the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. David stepped in, then hesitating. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Would it have changed how you let them treat me?" I replied. He didn't answer. The line had been drawn not in anger, but in clarity. I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer fighting for a seat at their table. I was building my own, and only those who truly saw me were welcome to sit. David followed me out to the side courtyard where the night air was thick with the scent of gardenias and the kind of quiet that makes hard conversations inevitable. "Maya," he said gently, "I didn't know. I truly didn't. If I had, I would have said something. I would have stood up for you." I turned slowly. "But that's the problem, David. You only believe I was worthy of defending now that you know I'm powerful. Where were you when they mocked me at dinner? When your mother called me a sweet girl who should stick to baking? You laughed or stayed silent." He looked away. I didn't want to cause a scene. "And I didn't want to keep shrinking," I said quietly. I had spent months brushing off his inaction, telling myself it came from a place of peacekeeping. But silence is not neutrality, it's complicity. Respect isn't reactive, it's foundational. Love that waits for credentials to become vocal is not love. It's admiration disguised as affection. And I'd had enough of being admired for the wrong things. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small envelope. "I filed last week," I said gently. "The papers are in here." He took them with trembling hands. "I thought we were building a life together." "We were," I nodded, "but I was building it alone." That conversation was the softest kind of ending. No yelling, no rage, just truth uncoiled. The lesson: if someone only respects your voice after it's amplified by success, they were never listening to begin with. A partner doesn't need to understand your mission, but they need to defend your dignity, even when the room doesn't. As I walked away, I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Free from the weight of conditional love. Free from the need to be small to be loved. And free to return to where it all began, not to hide, but to rebuild something bigger this time, with intention. And that return would begin not in a boardroom, but in a place far more sacred, my family's bakery. By sunrise the next morning, the Whitmore estate, once Isabelle's stage, was quiet. But a different kind of announcement was making its way through inboxes across the city. Novalend finalizes acquisition of Astra and Lennox Capital. New initiatives to support local businesses to launch immediately. There was no photo of me in designer heels or headlines shouting "CEO makes surprise move." That's not how I work. Quiet power doesn't need noise, it needs purpose. 3 months before the gala, I had submitted a private bid for the very estate where the celebration took place. Not out of spite, out of vision. I didn't see chandeliers or marble floors. I saw classrooms, shared kitchens, mentorship circles, and a place where underserved entrepreneurs could walk in with a dream and walk out with a plan. That morning, I signed the final deed and named the property, the Rivera Foundation for Opportunity. My name, not to erase the past, but to reshape it. To say the girl they once asked to stay in the kitchen now owned the house and opened the door for others. The truth is, revenge fades fast, but empowerment ripples. One woman walking away from disrespect can change a dinner. 10 women walking into a business class can change a generation. And so, with the ink still fresh and my mother Rosa by my side, no longer whispering apologies, but drafting programs for bilingual business coaching, I began again. Not as someone proving her worth, but as someone putting it to work. Because the greatest endings are the ones you write yourself not out of bitterness, but out of belief in what's possible next. And next, it looked a lot like home. That evening, long after the press releases settled and inboxes quieted, I was back at La Flor del Barrio. The bakery was closed, but the lights inside glowed soft and warm. My father was wiping down the counters like he always did, slow, deliberate, like each swipe held a memory. My mother was plating a batch of guava-filled pastelitos she had made just in case anyone dropped by. I did, and I stayed. There in the same small space where I once calculated bulk flour costs on scrap paper, I now discussed how to allocate foundation grants for women-owned businesses. And yet, nothing felt out of place. Power hadn't changed me. It had revealed what was always mine, the courage to create, the instinct to uplift, the quiet refusal to shrink. People think empires are built on noise, on headlines, investor calls, stages. But the truth, the most enduring ones are built in silence. One early morning at a time, one overlooked effort, one no one saw this coming moment after another. Mine wasn't flashy, but it was firm. A quiet empire built not on ego, but on empathy. The bakery became our first satellite location for the Rivera Foundation, offering financial literacy workshops on weekends, mentorship over cafecitos, and coding sessions for kids who, like me, once sat behind the register, dreaming quietly. And every Saturday, I still helped close up. Yes, the CEO still wipes down tables, because staying grounded isn't a weakness, it's wisdom. The lesson I carry forward is simple. Success isn't measured by who claps for you at the gala. It's measured by who you lift after the applause fades. Humility isn't the absence of pride, it's the presence of purpose. And when you build something rooted in that, you don't just rise, you help others rise with you. So, if you've ever felt unseen, dismissed, or told to wait your turn, don't let that define your story. Keep building, keep learning, keep showing up when no one's watching. Because that's when character forms. And eventually, quietly, the world will turn to look not because you demanded attention, but because you earned it. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find that the legacy you're building was never meant to impress, it was meant to serve. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or made to feel like you didn't belong, I'd love to hear your voice. Share your journey in the comments below. Who were you when no one was watching? What quiet dream have you been building? If you believe that respect matters more than status, that success means nothing without humility, and that quiet strength is still strength, then this is your space. This is your story, too. Subscribe to the channel for more true stories of rising from the margins. Like this video if it made you feel seen, and share it with someone who's still building in silence. They might need this reminder. You don't have to be loud to be powerful, just honest and unshakably you. We're not just telling stories here, we're reclaiming them. Together,